My name is David Puttnam. I was a filmmaker for 30 years. For the past 24 years, I've been sitting in the House of Lords as a Labour peer. That ended last night, believe it or not. I retired yesterday evening after 24 years. And I've worked heavily on climate change issues. I actually chaired the committee that took the world's first climate change act through Parliament. So I'm very proud of that. That was in 2008.
How do you think, in terms of climate change, how should the media be approaching the current crisis? And do you think they're doing enough?
It's a really great question, Emily, because I think the media find themselves in a tricky situation. If they go too hard on the threats and too hard on, as it were, your fears, and I had someone say this to me the other day, are they kind of disincentivizing you from doing things? So how do they balance out hope and fear? How do they make sure that we all are sufficiently aware and sufficiently fearful of the ramifications of accelerating climate change? On the other hand, how do we see ourselves as having some kind of future? Now, my own position, and I'm not trying to impose this on anybody, is that we have left things too late in one sense. We will bust through the 1.5 that we keep talking about as being the limit. I think we'll probably end up going much closer to 2, maybe even over 2. However, on the hopeful side, and I can say this to your age, and this is no use to me because I'll be long gone, we will bend it back and basically begin to recover. So I think by 2030, things are going to look pretty grim. But by 2050, we could have actually made serious progress and be getting things back. Here's the problem. During that period, between 2030 and 2050, many of the world's poorest people will suffer irretrievably. So food shortages, water shortages, food scarcity will become a massive issue. That will result in mass migration. So the most destabilizing aspect for you, for your generation, of climate change will not be gasping for air or not having enough to eat. It will be dealing with the implications of mass migration from those parts of the world, which will have reached a point where they're in survival mode. You know, people don't die quietly. If people think that they cannot possibly keep their children or themselves alive, they'll move. And so that clash of civilizations, if you like, is something you and your generation will have to work through. And it won't be easy.
Was there a turning point for you in your career that made you become a climate activist? And obviously you were a producer on the film Local Hero, which does have underlying environmental themes. Did that play a role in that decision?
It started actually with water privatization. I was very, very angry and opposed to water privatization in, I think, around 1987, 6-7. And that kind of, that's any activism in this area probably started then.
Back in 2008, you helped with the Climate Change Act, putting it into place and getting it through Parliament. How do you think it's helped cutting the UK's emissions?
It's created awareness. The most important thing we did was we created a legal requirement for government to take seriously and address the issues of the Climate Change Committee. So if I look back, the most important thing we achieved was the establishment on a statutory basis, that means on a legal basis, of the Climate Change Committee. The Climate Change Committee reports, I think, twice a year to government, and government is required in law to take account of their findings. So the government can't ignore the Climate Change Committee. It can have excuses, but it can't ignore it. So the most significant thing was we created a mechanism for checking how Britain was doing on climate change. We created a committee that could critique the government and say what was not happening and what needed to happen. And we had a situation where the government, by law, had to try to conform to or move towards climate limits, carbon limits. So those were great successes. And it's interesting to say that I, in the end, had near unanimous support. And the only problems I had were with those MPs and parliamentarians who were representing very clearly oil and gas, oil and gas interests. So, and there were only 2 or 3 of them, but for the most part, we got an amazing vote through Parliament, overwhelming vote through Parliament.
What do you think the main priority should be for the politicians, and are you hopeful that change will happen?
The most important requirement is they shouldn't treat it as a PR exercise, because then you, frankly, like you and Emily, should be outraged. If you're getting fobbed off effectively by a PR exercise, you should be furious. Their obligation is to tell you the truth. Their obligation is to tell you where we're headed, what we may be able to do, what people like yourselves could do to help make that possible, because in the end, it is about your futures. It's honestly not about the futures of almost anyone who is a delegate, a government delegate at the climate change conference. So yeah, I think their obligation is to be truthful with you, tell you what is and isn't possible, and you need to be very suspicious of anything that you feel is in some way, shape, or form just trying to fob you off. That would be serious if they did that.